Hi, this is Heath, and this is a little experiment. This is a Media Diet comic book review, unscripted, unedited, just one middle-aged guy talking about a comic book that he just read. Today's episode is two comics. We've got Dungeons & Dragons at the Spine of the World #1. Just came out from IDW, downstate a little bit. We've also got another licensed or media tie-in comic, Stranger Things and Dungeons & Dragons, also #1. This a joint publication from Dark Horse and IDW, because IDW must have the D&D license and Dark Horse must have the Stranger Things license. I enjoy and have enjoyed over the years Dungeons & Dragons related comic books. They haven't historically been very good, and they're not consistently excellent, but they are, as someone who enjoys playing the game and likes role-playing games in general, they are a fun way to have a hand in the game and in the world and in the character sets, even if you're not able to play. And so during the pandemic, I have continued to enjoy Dungeons & Dragons related comic books as a way to keep a hand in playing the game when I'm no longer able to share time and table with other people to do so here in the LA area. And so this new series, Dungeons & Dragons at the Spine of the World, just started coming out in October. It's written by Amy Garcia and AJ Mendez, art by Martin Coccolo. And if I misspell any names, please correct me in the comments and I'll fix it for next time. And it's basically a relatively brisk and somewhat dense, in terms of page design, introduction to the adventuring party that the storyline will take us with. And it also sets up the gambit in terms of what the point of the adventure or mystery is, as well as who the big baddie might be. And so we have someone who seems to be a sizable, stalwart warrior or barbarian sort. We have a warlock who loses the findings of a mining operation to this beautifully rendered Remmerhaz. And that's another neat thing about these comics and they've done it differently over the years. Sometimes they're a little too on the nose in terms of referring to gameplay or game language while in the comic, and this one does not do that. It does not mention abilities like you would use to roll ability scores. It does not mention spells as such, but it is fun to encounter creatures or monsters that you might not encounter in an actual encounter in the comic book, and then be able to go back into the monster manual or something else to learn more about them as well. There's a dragonborn character, and then they end up going back to a village, meeting a tiefling who seems to be the muscle hired to protect a halfling who has magical abilities, and then two kind of parties and storylines converge. We have this party already in the village wanting to protect the village. There seems to be something acting against the interests of the citizens there. We've got this warlock who was beleaguered by his miners fighting and killing each other, and the two come together because it seems to be that there is some kind of substance or gemstone or item that plays on humanoid greed, violence, and other behavior to bring out the worst in everybody. And let me just see, it's called Chardalin is the name of that substance. It is a kind of purplish black glowing stone, as you can see here. And so at the end of the story, after the party's introduced, there is perhaps at least just the voice of who might be the person who is the cause of this influx of Chardalin to this part of the realms. And so that's the comic book. It sets up an interesting enough party. It sets up an interesting enough mystery or story. There's not a lot of place there. It is in the Icewind Dale, but I'm not sure where in the realms otherwise, if this is a Forgotten Realms comic, where that is. I'll have to go back into some game books. But the thing that strikes me the most is that there's not game content in the comic, and that's something that I have also enjoyed over the years. This comic, and IDW comics in the past have had character sheets in the back, have had maybe a monster profile. This one has no actual playable game content. And interestingly enough, Pathfinder comics in the past have actually had maps as inserts that you can take out and actually play in gameplay. And so that's been cool. But what it does have is one of the alternative covers, cover B, seems to be a character sheet for the large stalwart warrior or barbarian character. And so it's got art by Max Davenport. But if you're looking for a version of this comic that actually aids gameplay, go for cover B. And as the series continues, we'll see if that's consistently the case, because you can always have your local comic shop pull cover B consistently if you're into that. So that is that, Dungeons and Dragons at the Spine of the World. Interesting enough that I would recommend and will check out the second issue myself. Moving on then to Stranger Things in Dungeons and Dragons #1. Just like the other Dungeons and Dragons series, those tend to be relatively limited series or mini-series, 4 to 6 issues. This one is explicitly going to be 4 issues. And this comic comes to us from IDW and Dark Horse, written by Jody Houser and Jim Zub. Jim Zub has done other either D&D comics or Stranger Things comics. Where do I know his name? I know his name from the Rick and Morty D&D comics, I believe. So I'll have to check that out. So written by those two, line art by Diego Galindo. And this comic is really interesting because even though it is set in the world of Stranger Things, and even though it is populated by the characters of Stranger Things, it does not really tell a Stranger Things story. It tells kind of a behind the scenes or back story, or not even backstory, kind of just interstitial story. And it doesn't tell a Dungeons and Dragons story. But what this comic book is it is about the group of friends' introduction to or discovery of Dungeons and Dragons as a game in this kind of musty bookshop staffed by someone who's actually into miniature wargaming, which is kind of cool to see in a comic book. He mentions that they are, what does it say? It's from a new fantasy game we're trying out. It's called Dungeons and Dragons. And so it actually situates the game at the beginning of D&D. And true to history, D&D did initially find pickup among miniature wargamers. And so there's a picture of the first edition of the boxed set that they would have gotten access to. That's after the white box. It's not the very, very first edition. And then later on in the comic, they actually also represent the expert set. And so it's a comic book about their introduction to the game and how it helps them escape from their mundane day-to-day and bullying and other experiences as younger school students, and actually represents them playing the game together. And so if you have played D&D, and if you have played D&D over the decades like I have, I've played since at least 1983, it might make you cry. like it did me. I actually cried reading this comic book because it is a comic book about friendship and what brings friends together and what friends do when they're together. And that brought back a lot to me. And the arc of the comic is the introduction to the game, their playing of the game, a series of adventures that they went on, and then this was kind of cool. They finished the campaign. Cinderstone's body explodes into a huge ball of flame that shoots up into the sky. Wow, we did it. So what's next? One of the characters says, well, you guys finished level 3, so that's it. The rules end there. And so that took me back to when I first got into D&D. It was the Menser set and the Beckme sets. And so the idea that you could play the basic set until it ran out of rules, you got the expert set, you could play that until it ran out of rules, get the companion set, play that until it runs out of rules. It actually ends with them graduating to the expert set, kind of a milestone for them as youth as well as, as characters. And so we'll see where it goes from here, because this was basically just setting it up and kind of a love story to role-playing gaming and friends. And it will be interesting to see what happens as the series continues, because there are 4 issues, and I don't know that it can do this for 3 more issues. So there has to be either some kind of plot that, let's see, my Cramma just crapped out. So we'll see if that recorded through that. My screen went blank, had to password back in. You'd think that recording something would keep it live. I'll look into that in the settings. But we'll see what happens with this. Interesting thing about this is, just like this and the other comic, it makes me want to play D&D. And so that's certainly a function that media tie-in comics can play. They either make you want to watch the show that you like watching or go back to the movie that you like watching, continue the story of a storyline you like. But this makes me want to play D&D. And so the other book, other than the cover B alternative cover, did not have variant cover, as they say. Had some gameplay content. This one does too. So this has a 5th edition character sheet with Stranger Things related artwork that you can use, and it's unpopulated, so it's just a blank. You can photocopy it and use it for your 5e games. And then there's also the character Will the Wise, character created by Will Byers in the show, and it is specific to the original basic D&D, or original D&D. Actually, not OD&D, but basic D&D. So if you play that version of the game, you can certainly play his 3rd level conjurer, and that's kind of fun. And that's something that they've done with the there's a Stranger Things starter set that Wizards came out with, and so there's some other Stranger Things characters in there. And so anyway, 2 D&D comics, both recommended. One will certainly have legs and a life after this first issue. This one, a little more skeptical that they can keep doing a comic about kids playing D&D for more issues. But then Knights of the Dinner Table's been going for however many issues now, and that's a comic about people playing D&D. Amazingly fun. So really, really dig the actual gameplay content. And so something I would say to Dark Horse and to IDW, anyone doing role-playing game tie-in comics, do make sure that there's some gameplay content so people can use it. And I think you'll find that kind of dovetails and spins back with what you're actually doing. So this has been Heath. This has been a Media Diet Comic Book Report, a little experiment. We'll see if I like this. We'll see if you like this. Let me know in the comments below.